Chapter 21. Cleopatra. All strange and terrible events are welcome, but comforts we despise. Cleopatra. I was exhilarated and enthusiastic about starting my mission. It was returning to the past, to search for and bring back the card belonging to the darkness. I could barely contain my excitement, as I, Myra, was going to ancient Egypt, to the Egypt of the great Empress Cleopatra. Leoleb was with me. He kept making comments, and he taught me a lot about Cleopatra. His knowledge about that time and history was incredible. He accompanied me to the time-traveling room. Leoleb, who was the soul of Cleopatra? I asked. Cleopatra was Isis incarnated on earth, Leoleb answered. Can you tell me more about Isis? I asked. Isis was one of the most important deities of ancient Egypt. Egypt was the first civilization to worship her, which later spread to the Roman Empire and the greater Greco-Roman world. Isis is still worshipped today, as there is an interfaith organization dedicated to the fellowship of Isis, Leoleb answered. What kind of goddess is she? Was she a real god? I asked. Yes, one of the 22 original gods, Leoleb answered. 22 gods? I asked, surprised. Yes, Myra, 22 gods, Leoleb answered. May you explain? I asked. Not now, but I will explain to you when you return from your trip, Leoleb said. Can you tell me more about Isis? I asked. Isis is worshipped as the ideal mother and wife, as well as the patroness of nature and magic. You're going to find some of these qualities in Cleopatra. In mythology, Isis is portrayed as a woman wearing a headdress shaped like a throne and with an ankh in her hand. Ready to go on your first trip to the past, Myra? Leoleb asked me. Yes, I am, I replied. We said goodbye to each other, and I walked through the screen, and suddenly I was flying over Egypt. First I was flying over the pyramids, and then I was in Alexandria. It was the year 69 before our common era, and the day was May 20th. I added the numbers. 5 plus 2 plus 6 plus 9 equals 22. Cleopatra was a master number 22. 22 is considered the most powerful of all the numbers. Those with a life path number 22 have a great ability to apply knowledge in a practical way of learning how to achieve great success. Cleopatra was born for success and admiration. 22 is the number of a master builder, as was Cleopatra. A master builder of love, passion, and power. Number 22 thoughts have incredible power. They are a classic case of being careful what you wish for, and Cleopatra knew since early childhood what she wanted. She wanted to be Queen of Egypt. She tried to love and be loved. She was under the rule of Taurus, and a Taurus never quits, even if sometimes they possibly should. Their stubbornness is not accidental. Taurus is ruled by Venus, which makes them sensuous and luxury-loving, as they love to be spoiled. There is no doubt that Taurus was the perfect sign for Cleopatra. Taurus lives in the realm of sensations and emotions. Natural-born leaders, they don't like anyone to dictate to them what to do. They can be vain and arrogant, but one of the worst faults of the Taurus sign is anger. I can see her father, King Ptolemy XII, next to his wife, Cleopatra VI, who was Ptolemy XII's sister. Cleopatra's family ruled Egypt for more than 300 years before she was born. She was a member of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a family of Macedonian Greek origin that ruled Egypt after Alexander the Great's death in the year 323 BC. At the time of his death, Alexander's empire covered more than 2 million square miles and was the most significant state ever known. Alexander founded Alexandria, and Cleopatra was born there. Following the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC, his generals competed for his throne, but finally his empire was divided up among 5 of his generals. General Ptolemy received Egypt, which then became the kingdom of Ptolemy. The unity of Alexander's empire was gone, but Greek civilization continued to spread throughout this region. General Ptolemy I was going to be the first king of Egypt, and Empress Cleopatra VII was going to be the final one. Throughout their dynasty, the Ptolemies spoke only Greek and refused to learn any other language. However, Cleopatra decided to learn Egyptian and represented herself to her people as the reincarnation of Isis. She was not lying, because she was Isis incarnated on earth. For the first time, I was able to witness Empress Cleopatra with my very own eyes, without anyone describing things to me. Who was this extraordinary woman who people in modern times still talk about with such reverence? I watched Cleopatra ruling Egypt jointly with her father, Ptolemy XII. Now we are in the year 51 BC. Ptolemy XII is dying, and he is leaving his throne to 17-year-old Cleopatra and her brother, the 12-year-old Ptolemy XIII. The last will and final testament of Pharaoh Ptolemy XII established that his 2 children would inherit the throne at the same time. However, it stipulated that both of them had to be married to each other. The marriage took place, but Ptolemy XIII was not willing to uphold his side of the agreement, as he wanted all the power to go only to him. Over the next few years, Egypt struggled to overcome an economic crisis that brought famine to all Egyptian lands. Meanwhile, in Rome, the situation was very unpleasant, as it was in turbulence. Julius Caesar had formed the first triumvirate along with Crassus and Pompeius. Crassus died at the hands of the Parthians during the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BC. The death of Crassus undermined the alliance, and Julius Caesar and Pompeius then engaged in a cruel civil war. After being defeated by Caesar in the Battle of Pharsalus, Pompeius escaped to Alexandria, seeking sanctuary. When Pompeius disembarked in Alexandria, he was beheaded in front of his wife and children by one of his former officers, now at the service of Ptolemy XIII. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria 2 days later, Ptolemy presented him with Pompeius's severed head. It was a cruel destiny for Pompeius. Instead of obtaining freedom, the only thing he accomplished was to have his head cut off and brought as a gift to Caesar. Caesar did not like this one bit. After all that had happened, he still admired his friend, even if later he would become his enemy. Caesar was enraged. Although Pompeius was Caesar's political enemy, he was a Roman consul and did not deserve murder. Caesar stayed in Alexandria and imposed himself as a judge between the rival claims of Ptolemy XIII and Cleopatra. It is here where Cleopatra went on stage. She was delightful and sensible, just like a professional animal trainer who loves fierce circus animals. Eager to take advantage of Caesar's anger toward Ptolemy XIII, Cleopatra, rolled up in a carpet, was smuggled secretly into Caesar's palace to meet with him. It was then that Cleopatra brought out her Machiavellian side and her unique gifts. She asked Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome at that time, for help, and he agreed to assist her. Cleopatra became Caesar's mistress, and 9 months later, after their first meeting in 47 BC, Cleopatra gave birth to their son, Ptolemy Caesar, nicknamed Caesarion, which means Little Caesar. It was here when Caesar decided to abandon his plans to annex Egypt into Rome. Instead, Caesar backed Cleopatra's claim to the throne of Egypt. The war started, and Caesar and Cleopatra defeated Ptolemy XIII's army at the Battle of the Nile. Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile, and after that, Caesar restored Cleopatra as the Queen of Egypt. He also installed Cleopatra's younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, as her new co-ruler. Cleopatra was 22 years old. and the year was 47 BC, numbers 22 and 47. The light and the darkness conduct their war with these numbers. But did Caesar and Cleopatra know about these numbers? Was Cleopatra aware that she was Isis reincarnated? She said that she knew, but how did she know? Some historians have defined Cleopatra as an ambitious woman who utilized her sexuality and her sensuous physical appearance not only to sustain, but also augment her power. From what I have learned through Leolib's explanations about what happened in Egypt with Empress Cleopatra, the reality is much more complicated and intricate. There is no doubt that Cleopatra used Julius Caesar, but Julius Caesar also used Cleopatra. The situation was much more complicated than it appears, since we are merely observers and cannot completely understand. If Cleopatra had only been a whim for Julius Caesar, then why did he love her until the time he died? Why didn't he abandon her? Why did he choose to take her to Rome so that she could be close to him? Cleopatra gave Julius Caesar a son, Caesarion. Cleopatra treasured Julius Caesar, and she loved him very much. Love is a word that applies to many different things. It may be a love of power or love of a person who represents power. Any kind of love is valid if it depicts real love. A child loves his parents, and his parents possess a great love for their child. If the child takes advantage of the love that his parents have for him, does that mean that the love of that child for his parents is less? We change as we grow up, and we fulfill our dreams in a world where cynicism rules, where cynicism is the king and distrust ends up governing our lives. We talk about love without barriers, a limitless kind of love, an unconditional love without asking anything in return. However, we forget the real meaning of the word love. It doesn't matter why we love. The important thing is to be able to love. Before I began this trip, I discussed with Leolib, and he helped me recognize and finally understand reality. The love of the light is conditional. It's contingent on everything and dependent on loving God. Why must we love God? Is it because during our lives we have some contract with Him? Wouldn't it be better if when we're on earth, instead of focusing on loving God so much, we could think about loving people who are closer to us? What about our parents or our children? There is a kind of love that is selfish, but it is love. Yes, Cleopatra admired Julius Caesar, and she truly loved him. My honor was merely conquered, not yielded. Yes, it is also true that Julius Caesar, in exchange for that love, gave her an empire. But isn't that love? What love is purer than that, than to provide a realm for your beloved? Cleopatra wanted Julius Caesar to be an emperor, and what's wrong with that? In Rome they did not believe in emperors, nor did they believe in kings. Julius Caesar was able to break through those beliefs in some ways, even though the only thing he could do was to become a dictator. Yes, the very own Senate, the very own town of Rome appointed him as a dictator. Moreover, it was that very same town that gave the power to Cleopatra to become the dictator of their hearts. All of Rome was able to see the triumphant beginnings of the empress. It was a spectacular show. It was truly extraordinary. It was like a circus performance, as one was watching an extravaganza. It was a real circus. In the year 46 BC, Cleopatra, Ptolemy, and Caesarion visited Rome. Cleopatra resided in one of Caesar's palaces, and the relationship between Caesar and Cleopatra was evident to the Roman people, and slowly became a great scandal, because Caesar was married to Calpurnia. Animosity grew against Cleopatra, but Caesar didn't care about what people thought, and erected a golden statue of her, represented as Isis in the Temple of Venus. On March 15, 44 BC, Caesar was assassinated, and a bitter civil war ensued between the Caesarian faction. The squad included the assassins of Caesar, which was led by Marcus Brutus and Cassius Ligarius. Cleopatra sided with the Caesarian party. Mark Antony, Caesar's deputy, visited Cleopatra regularly. She knew that he was falling in love with her, and she praised him, but later rectified, "In praising Antony, I have depraised Caesar." Mark Antony fell in love with Cleopatra the very first moment he saw her. Antony was jealous of his mentor, Caesar, but at the same time he also complimented him. Why mention that? Because of his excellent taste. Is it tasteless to fall in love with beauty? With all the cruelty going on in the world, why not admire beauty? Was Cleopatra beautiful? An admirer once noted that Cleopatra was a woman of surpassing beauty, and at that time, when she was in the prime of her youth, she was the most striking. She also possessed a most pleasant voice and knowledge of how to make herself agreeable to everyone. Being brilliant to look upon and to listen to, with the power to subjugate everyone, even a love-sated man already past his prime, she thought it would be in keeping with her role to meet Caesar, and she reposed in her beauty all their claims to the throne. There is no doubt Cleopatra was haughty and astonishingly proud in the matter of beauty, but not everyone praised her. The Roman poet Propertius called her a whore queen, and Egypt's shame. And later on the Augustan poets vilified her as a foreign seductress. Lucan repeatedly refers to her beauty, but severely criticized her. Harmful beauty had brought ruin to Troy. So did that of Cleopatra's influence, Rome's civil war. It is her appearance that she relies upon, pleading her case to Caesar, simulating grief but without tears to remain attractive and to allow her raw beauty to aid her entreaty. However, what happened to Cleopatra? In the year 44 before our era, a conspiracy killed Julius Caesar. Cleopatra, the animal tamer of hearts, then returned to Egypt and abandoned her dead king. But her love never extinguished. A new triumvirate was formed and was made up of Lepidus, Octavius, and Mark Antony. Lepidus died during combat, and Octavius and Mark Antony assigned and divided the Roman Empire amongst themselves. Mark Antony then went to Egypt in search of his love. Yes, in search of Cleopatra. Even though Cleopatra never knew this, Mark Antony had fallen in love with her. Mark Antony marched to Egypt and once more found the love of his life, Cleopatra. What should she have done? She couldn't resist him, and she couldn't resist the power that Mark Antony represented. He offered it to her on a silver platter. Once again, love represented power for Cleopatra. Yes, that power is standard of that very same power which represents the Roman Empire, and in which men like Mark Antony and Julius Caesar are capable of conducting themselves. It is in a precise way to look good. The only thing that Cleopatra did was to remain near them. Cleopatra loved her son Caesarion, and she wanted him to be the future emperor of Rome. Due to his genetic inheritance, it was his correct role, because his father was Julius Caesar. Cleopatra wanted to vindicate that same right, but Octavius, who later became Augustus Caesar, was not willing to allow that to happen. Due to Egyptian tradition, Cleopatra as empress represented Caesarion as the reincarnation of Horus, the son of Isis and Osiris. The Egyptians of that time began to consider that Cleopatra, as well as Caesarion, were divine beings. However, doesn't the light tell us that we are all divine? That we derive from heavenly beams of light? So what was Cleopatra's mistake? The assassination of Julius Caesar in the year 44 BC took Rome to civil war and caused a lot of pain and destruction. During these tumultuous times, Mark Antony left Rome to meet Cleopatra. Some Romans thought that Cleopatra could have helped his enemies, but Mark Antony was indeed in love with Cleopatra. Candidly, as I already mentioned before, he was utterly and totally in love with her from the first moment he saw her in Rome. In the year 42 before our era, Mark Antony and Cleopatra met in the city of Tarsus, which in modern times is now part of Turkey. Cleopatra's arrival was majestic. It was like the arrival of a goddess, and that goddess forever smote Mark Antony. Cleopatra received Mark Antony with a lavish banquet, in which the service consisted entirely of gold and jeweled vessels made with fine art. Tapestries made of purple and gold threads adorned the walls, where Cleopatra's heavenly beauty is exhibited. I can see Cleopatra in makeup, weighed down with a fortune in pearls around her neck and jewels in her hair. Her breasts are visible beneath the sheer fabric of her oriental dress. One Roman observer noted, "Judging by the proofs which she had had before this of the effect of her beauty upon Caesar, she hoped that she would more easily bring Mark Antony to her feet. Caesar met her when she was still a girl and inexperienced in affairs, but she was going to meet with Mark Antony at the very time when women have the most brilliant beauty and at the same time intellectual power." Cleopatra awakened and kindled passions unknown yet to Mark Antony. He fell for Cleopatra's beauty and talent, as Antony was captivated by her. He was overwhelmed with the riches of the display, but Cleopatra quietly smiled at him and said that all the things were a present for him. That very same night they consummated a sexual relationship, and Cleopatra became pregnant with Mark Antony's child. Cleopatra later had twins with Antony. Mark Antony could not tolerate separation from his lover, Cleopatra, for any length of time, so he returned to Egypt and married Cleopatra in precisely the year 33 BC. When they were together once more, it was an ominous and foreboding message, indicating that something terrible was going to happen. According to Roman law, the marriage between Mark Antony and Cleopatra was illegal. During the ceremony in Alexandria, Mark Antony made 2 golden thrones which sat on a platform of silver, one for him and the other for Cleopatra. At their feet he placed dominions for their children. He proclaimed Cleopatra Queen of Egypt, Cyprus, and Libya, and with her conjointly Caesarion, the son of Julius Caesar. Mark Antony and Cleopatra's twins were going to have the lifestyle of kings. To Alexander he gave Armenia, Media, and Parthia, and to Ptolemy he gave Phoenicia, Syria, and Cyprus. Then suddenly, Mark Antony was gone. He had returned to Rome and had married Octavius' sister. How do you think Cleopatra reacted when she found out? I could feel her pain. Once again she was alone and abandoned. I was also a mother. On many occasions I had to raise my son alone. I know what it feels like to have a husband far away. I am aware of the loneliness of having a husband who has only the title of a husband who doesn't have time to be part of the family because his obligations do not permit him to spend extra time with his family. However, things did not go well in Rome for Mark Antony and his new wife Octavia. Octavius thought that his sister Octavia had been injuriously treated and commanded her to live in a separate house, but she refused to leave her husband. Then the 2 most celebrated commanders of the time, Octavius and Mark Antony, could involve the Roman people in a civil war, one out of a passion for a woman and the other out of resentment about a woman. Octavius related to the Roman Senate all the things that were happening in Egypt and turned them against Mark Antony. Antony reciprocated and sent to Rome messages of accusations against Octavius. The main allegations were that Octavius did not make any division with him of Sicily, that he had retrieved the ships that he had lent him for the war, and that after deposing Lepidus, their colleague in the triumvirate, he had taken for himself the army, governments, and revenues formerly appropriated to him. His final accusation was that Octavius had parceled out almost all of Italy amongst his soldiers, and left nothing for Antony's soldiers. Octavius was angered and answered Mark Antony by stating that he had put Lepidus out of government because of his misconduct, and that what territory he attained in war he would divide with Mark Antony as soon as Antony gave him a share of Armenia. Furthermore, Mark Antony's soldiers had no claim in Italy, owning Media and Parthia. Antony could not wait any longer, and he returned to Egypt to be with his beloved Cleopatra and attempted to build an empire for her. Mark Antony challenged Octavius in Rome because he wanted to be the heir to the Alexandrian Empire, and next to him, governing that empire, would be Isis reincarnate, Cleopatra. Together they would be capable of reviving the empire that Alexander the Great once had. Love and war will take them to a final confrontation with Octavius. A few months later, as soon as Octavius had completed his preparations for war, he had a decree made declaring war on Cleopatra, and depriving Mark Antony of the authority which he had let a woman exercise in his place. The drums of war were approaching. Mark Antony and Cleopatra went to Ephesus, where ships were coming in from all quarters to form a navy of 800 vessels, of which Cleopatra furnished 200, together with 20,000 talents and provisions for the whole army during the coming war. The speed and extent of Mark Antony's preparations alarmed Octavius, who feared he might be forced to fight the decisive battle that summer, and he tried to gain time to put together a mighty army. Mark Antony had 500 ships of war, including numerous galleys of 8 and 10 banks of oars, richly ornamented as if they depicted triumph. Conversely, Octavius had 250 boats of war. Mark Antony had 120,000 foot soldiers and 12,000 horses, while Octavius had 80,000 foot soldiers and 12,000 horses. Mark Antony was much superior to Octavius in land forces, yet out of compliance with Cleopatra, he wanted the victory to be gained by sea. Mark Antony, while madly in love with Cleopatra, could not see his vessels were ill-manned and badly rowed. On the other side, Octavius had ships that were built not for score or show, but service. Not pompous galleys, but light, swift, and perfectly human-crewed ships. Mark Antony landed his fleet near Actium, and Octavius seized the opportunity and crossed the Ionian Sea, securing himself a place in Epirus. Mark Antony realized too late that his land forces were way off. The following morning, Antony's fleet sailed to face the enemy on either side of the channel of Actium. Octavius, deceived by Mark Antony's strategy, retired. Then Octavius changed his approach and decided to cut off his opponent's water supply by ambushing Antony's supplies. For the next 3 days the sea was so rough that they couldn't engage in combat. But on the 5th day the battle commenced. The Octavian navy set fire to all the Egyptian ships except 60. Mark Antony was in a small boat and continuously went from one ship to another, encouraging his soldiers, and bidding them to stand firm and fight as steadily on their large ships as if they were on land. His fleet advanced towards Octavius, and the latter, seeing that, ordered his right squadron to retire, and subsequently forcing Antony's fleet to go out to sea as far as possible. Octavius' strategy was to sail around and round, and with his well-trained troops ready to attack Mark Antony's large vessels, which were slow to move and difficult to manage. On the following day they engaged in combat. Mark Antony's vessels were incapable of the rapidity needed to make the stroke effective. Octavius did not charge head-to-head on Mark Antony, as he wanted the engagement to resemble a land fight, as of the attack and defense of a fortified place. During one entire battle there were always 3 or 4 vessels from Octavius for one of Mark Antony's. Fire flung from these vessels, spears, javelins, poles, and hit Mark Antony's ships. Mark Antony's answer to these strikes was to use catapults to pour down vessels from wooden towers. By the end of the day the future was still undecided. Suddenly, Cleopatra's 60 ships were seen hoisting sail and heading out to sea toward the Peloponnesus, in full flight, right through the ships that were engaged. I can see Mark Antony disoriented and astonished. Why was Cleopatra abandoning him in the middle of the battle? Mark Antony thought that something might have happened to Cleopatra. He forgot that he was a commander or even a man, and so he lost his judgment. The soul of a lover lives in somebody else's body, and in this case, Mark Antony's soul was in Cleopatra's body. As a result, he must have thought that he must move with her wherever she went, as soon as he saw her ship sailing away. Mark Antony, for the love of Cleopatra, abandoned all those who were fighting and losing their lives for him. Are love and madness so different? Science tells us that people experiencing romantic love have a chemical profile in their brains similar to that of people with obsessive-compulsive disorder. Love consists of 3 stages: lust, romance, and attachment. Was there lust between Mark Antony and Cleopatra? There was, as Cleopatra offered a sort of fascination. It was a fascination which defined her as a mystic, muse, and empress. Was there a romance between Mark Antony and Cleopatra? He built a golden throne for her. Isn't that romantic? Moreover, finally, was there an attachment between Mark Antony and Cleopatra? Maybe they didn't have the time for that stage of their love, as their love lasted for only a few years. Mark Antony was caught up in a romantic love, focusing all his attention on the object of his affection, that was none other than Cleopatra. One observer noted, "Romantic view is much more powerful than the sex drive." Mark Antony jumped into a galley, taking with him only 2 men, and will follow Cleopatra. That was the beginning of the end for Mark Antony. Cleopatra saw Mark Antony coming after her and gave him the signal to come aboard. However, when he came on board, Cleopatra disappeared into her room. Mark Antony then sat on the ship's prow. The remaining of Mark Antony's fleet suffered a tremendous defeat and gave up the contest, leaving behind more than 5,000 men killed and 300 ships taken. Mark Antony's troops could not believe that he abandoned them and flown away. In returning to Egypt, Cleopatra sent ambassadors to Octavius, asking him to allow her to keep the kingdom of Egypt. And Mark Antony sent messengers to Octavius as well, pleading with him to allow him to remain a private citizen in Egypt. Octavius would not listen to any proposals from Mark Antony, but he promised Cleopatra that there was no reasonable favor which she might not expect, if she put Mark Antony to death, or expelled him from Egypt. Octavius sent Thyrsis as his ambassador to Egypt to reach an agreement with Cleopatra. Mark Antony began to be jealous of Thyrsis, but Cleopatra always remained faithful to Mark Antony. Cleopatra told Mark Antony, "Fool, don't you see now that I'd have poisoned you 100 times had I been able to live without you?" The confrontation of the war deferred for a year, but at the beginning of spring, Octavius decided to travel to Egypt and finalize what he had already begun. When Octavius's fleet approached Alexandria, Mark Antony's infantry marched out of the city. Standing upon a rising ground, Antony's troops could see the army approaching. Besides, Mark Antony's fleet was posted across the sea to face the enemy for battle. Antony saw the Roman fleet arrive, and he could see with his own eyes how his very own fleet, instead of battling them, first moved out of their way. Then they surrendered, gave them a tribute, and then finally united with Octavius's army. The Romans had a reputation for being very pragmatic people, so why fight for something that was already lost? It is better to join with the winner. That way they could not only continue to be alive, but they would also enjoy some of the crumbs that the winning power might give them. Mark Antony thought that Cleopatra had deceived him, and that she had made a secret pact with Octavius. Octavius had sent out many emissaries to fulfill the agreement, but Cleopatra, out of love and faithfulness to Mark Antony, had rejected every one of them. Cleopatra, afraid of Mark Antony's fury, hid inside her mausoleum. Mark Antony knew that Cleopatra was in the tomb, and he thought that she was dead. In desperation, Mark Antony requested to die in the mausoleum next to Cleopatra, to be next to her during his last few minutes on earth. Mark Antony took his own life, and when he was bleeding to death, he found out that Cleopatra was not dead. When Mark Antony died, Cleopatra accompanied him. She took a poisonous snake out of a container, and she permitted herself to be bitten by the snake. She died instantly. Her last words were, "I will not enable others to triumph over me." Both souls then entered the world of darkness. They did not know that there, in that beautiful world, they would also run into Julius Caesar. The world of darkness is, in reality, nothing more than the real world of the light. The end of Mark Antony's and Cleopatra's lives had a beautiful romantic love ending. It was a heroic ending, like the love ending of Romeo and Juliet, with the exception that Mark Antony and Cleopatra were real people. They existed and were flesh and blood. They were not a product of the imagination of some great writer. My time was over, and gradually I returned to the scanning place. Waiting for me were Leoleb and Isis. "Welcome back, Myra," Leoleb said. "Thank you, Leoleb," I answered. "Let me introduce you to Isis," Leoleb said. "I'm pleased to meet you, Isis," I shyly answered. "What did you think about my life as Cleopatra?" Isis asked. "It was not easy to be Cleopatra," I answered. "Cleopatra was Eve, but also at that same time she was Isis. Mark Antony and Julius Caesar were nothing more than a combination of Adam, who did not have within him the same courage as Eve did," Isis answered. "Which tarot card represents Cleopatra?" Leoleb asked me. I did not doubt that the tarot card number 3, the Empress, was the tarot card corresponding to Cleopatra. The Empress holds the eagle in her left hand, and in Egyptian mythology, the eagle is a symbol of the soul and life, I replied. "What irony! Life and death simultaneously," Isis said. In the tarot card number 3, the Empress has a crown with 12 peaks, or also 12 stars, which represent the beginning of earthly and spiritual life. It would be like the equivalent of the equilibrium of life between Adam and Eve, or as a universal fortifying strength. Card number 3 is representing Cleopatra, seated, massive with vestments and the royal aspect, as of a daughter of heaven and earth. The symbol of Venus is on the scepter which she bears, surmounted by the globe of the world. As someone defined, the Empress symbolizes the virgin state of the cosmic unconsciousness, who, at the same time, generates activities of the same subconsciousness. The crown signifies worship and authority like a marriage between heaven and earth, and Cleopatra was that and much more. Cleopatra ruled over Egypt, but she ruled over the hearts of Julius Caesar and Mark Antony at all levels, conscious and subconscious. Mark Antony abandoned his men in the middle of the most crucial battle of his life to lose the fight and the heart of his beloved. Some people see in card number 3 that the Empress is pregnant, connecting femininity and fertility. What was the fate of Cleopatra's children? Octavius had Caesarion killed, but spared the lives of the 3 children Cleopatra had with Mark Antony. They were sent to live with Octavius's sister, Octavia, the former wife of Mark Antony. The Empress symbolizes one half of the perfect polarity, the emperor being the other side of the balance. But in this case we know that Cleopatra had 2 emperors, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. The Empress card holds power to steadily and determinedly build and rebuild, and this is what Cleopatra did. She created an empire and rebuilt it. But she embarked on a journey of revenge and dug 2 graves. The Empress card also symbolizes the Earth Mother, a new beginning. She is sensual, earthly, and generous. She signifies broadening of the horizons to expect returns greater than you'd ever anticipated. Isis innovates the Empress's feminine symbol. She is beautiful and sensual. Cleopatra's beauty was known as in itself incomparable, and stroke those who saw her. Was Cleopatra persuasive? Yes, she was, as in the persuasiveness of her discourse, her irresistible charm, her presence, her character, and her tongue made her like an instrument of many strings ready to be played. The Empress is surrounded by a beautiful, lush forest, with a stream running through it, showing the Empress's deep emotional connection with life. The reversed Empress Tarot card, number 3, suggests the loss of personal power through placing too much emphasis on another person's emotional or material needs, thus rejecting your own. Did Cleopatra play the Empress Tarot card reversed? She did during different times of her life, but did she have any other choice? What aspects comprise one's choices? An option is an act of selecting or making a decision when faced with 2 or more possibilities. Did Cleopatra have any choice? One can choose between imagined options or between real options, followed by the corresponding action. Individual behavior differs when one's decision is unclear, or when one possesses several options. However, how many choices did Cleopatra have? Julius Caesar? Did she choose him, or did he pick her? A more critical choice has the potential to improve a person's welfare. Was Julius Caesar a more excellent choice? Of course he was. He was the dictator of Rome, and consequently the world. Did any woman have a more superior opportunity? Then there was Mark Antony. An individual's personality plays a significant role in how individuals deal with choices. Was Mark Antony a choice? He came to Egypt to be with Cleopatra. He left everything he had to be with her. He abandoned his wife, his palace, and his titles to be with her. Did Cleopatra have any other choice but to accept him? Was Cleopatra really in love with Mark Antony? Satisfiers may set high standards to make a choice, but are content to choose an acceptable option. On the other hand, maximizers who are always seeking the very best option from a choice set may anguish at making a choice. However, Cleopatra had no choices. First, Julius Caesar, and then Mark Antony. Both of them fell for her, and she did not have any other opportunity but to take both of them. According to the Rider-Waite Tarot, the Empress is above all things universal fecundity, and the outer sense of the world, the repository of all things, nurturing and sustaining, and the feeding of others. Cleopatra was the repository of all things nurturing and sustaining. Cleopatra was for Caesar and Antony the germination of an idea before it was ready to be fully born. But a new life, a new relationship, requires patience and nurturing. It needs love and attention, and this is what Cleopatra did, because the Empress is a creation of God, and in this particular case, played by Isis, one of the 22 original creators. Cleopatra created life and romance, but she was too spoiled to think about others. The mighty scepter in card number 3 is a symbol of royal power throughout history. But in Cleopatra's case, it is just temporary, something that eventually will vanish. The crown of 7 stars depicted in the card represents the 12 signs of the zodiac. The Empress's mastery to rule over everyone of any astrological sign represents seductive power. Cleopatra's hand on her knee is idle, indicating plenty of time to be immersed in the joys of life and the pursuit of pleasures. The shield is a metaphor for protecting herself with her beauty. If someone were to break her heart, she would deflect the pain by being able to find yet another man of her dreams. So this is what Cleopatra did. The death of Julius Caesar broke her heart, but she deflected her heart and ran into Mark Antony's arms. The life of Cleopatra was like a fairy tale, but with an unhappy ending. Growing up as a little princess has its benefits, but in the case of Cleopatra, it also had its ultimate damnation. Tarot card number 3 means understanding and extraordinary sensitivity to the emotional aspects of life. When a loved one needs a helping hand, the role of the Empress is to fill it. It is not your choice. It is your duty. This card also represents the enjoying extravagance, receiving generous rewards, plenty of luxury, and always having more than enough. This card is about giving and receiving pleasure, focusing on the body and appreciating beauty. The Empress asks from everybody surrounding her to embrace the principle of life, because she is the epitome of abundance. There is no other card in the tarot that can express love, beauty, art, and pleasure as the card of the Empress. The triple crown symbolizes the triple goddess. Maiden, mother, and shield are the 3 primary components of this goddess. As a maiden, the Empress is young, vivacious, and fertile. As a mother, she sincerely cares for life as her child, and firmly radiates the love within her heart to others. Cleopatra entered dangerous situations guarded by the shield of love. The shield removed any sense of fear from her body. The shield in Cleopatra was a paradox. There coexists protection and love, because where there is love, there is instant protection. To love also brings vulnerability. The Empress requests love on all levels, bringing forth to fly freely with the energy of the eagle, and to liberate the spirit as well. The Empress sits crowned with Egyptian energy on which she may draw, and she has within her the energy of the pyramids. Cleopatra, or Isis, is the Empress unveiled. I finished. "Excellent, Myra," Isis noted. "Thank you, Isis," I answered. "Is there something you want to ask about Cleopatra?" Isis questioned. "Who did you love the most, Julius Caesar or Mark Antony?" I asked. "Julius Caesar, without a doubt," Isis answered. "Why? Mark Antony died for you," I asked. "I adored Julius Caesar. When he died, my pain was so terrible that I could barely breathe, see, or live," Isis replied. "Did you love Mark Antony?" I asked. "After the death of Julius Caesar, I had to look back at my life and Caesarion's life. I was hurt, as I was human then. I asked myself, what did I do wrong? Why did these people in Rome hate me? Why don't they care about me? However, then, one must let go of their emotions. My sadness had subsided, but the pain remained. The Roman people respected me, but not by my people. Finally, I found the courage to let go of what I couldn't change. Julius Caesar was no longer there to love and protect me. But suddenly, Mark Antony showed me that he was in love with me. He was strong and powerful, and I merely accepted his love. I played my role as a queen and as a mother. The death of Julius Caesar made me stronger, smarter, and more resilient," Isis answered. "But you're a god. You're one of the original creators," I stated. "When we are on earth, we overvalue what we are not and undervalue what we are. I knew I was the Queen of Egypt, but I did not know that I was a god. After the death of Julius Caesar, my soul went through a profound transformation, and I understood that I was a god, simply playing a game. However, I discovered love, and this game became too powerful to me. I had feelings and emotions that, as a god, I had never had before," Isis answered. "Then what did you do?" I asked. "I requested to go to the darkness to send another soul to Cleopatra's body, which they did. I went in and out of Cleopatra's body, but I allowed the other soul to continue the love game with Mark Antony. Isis replied. A body can have more than one soul. Isis did not want to continue playing this game alone, and we immediately sent another soul into Cleopatra's body, and I must tell you that she did a wonderful job, Leolib explained. Was the other soul another god? I asked. No, she was not, but she was the perfect match for Mark Antony, Leolib answered. What is the commandment that you bring to the darkness? Isis asked. I believe that Cleopatra's commandment should be, life is nothing more than a game, I answered. Life is nothing more than a game? Please explain, Isis asked. In every soul exists masculine polarity and feminine polarity, similar to a majestic combination of the light and darkness. A reaction of the light or the darkness accompanies every action. Each action accompanies an equally intense yet opposite reaction. But this is only a game, and at one point Isis got bored and decided not to play anymore. Cleopatra was able to help Julius Caesar's game, and he became a dictator. It was in the end of the Roman Empire, and Mark Antony got lost in his battle. However, he helped open the door for Octavius's game, so that he could create what officially became known as the Roman Empire, and consequently became the first Roman emperor. He won his match. The love of a woman made the two most brilliant men of those times change their ideologies for love. So what is love, then? What is light? And what is darkness? Is it only a game? With this card, Cleopatra the Empress showed us the reality of everything that surrounds us is only a game. The triangle formed by Cleopatra, Caesar, and Mark Antony was also a game. Was it a game of love or one of passion? Was it a game of power? Whatever the answer, it remains merely a game. Is it only a game? I understood that on the earthly existence that there are always two sides or positions of analysis. There is the spiritual side and the material side. Love becomes a pain, and that same pain becomes love. Life constantly has ups and downs. Everything that surrounds us, not only here but also in the world of mortals, is nothing more than a game. Life is nothing more than a game, which takes us through to a new life, and this game has taken me to a new life, which has given me light, the light of the darkness, I concluded.